Good evening. I'd like to call to order the special school committee meeting on Thursday, April 28th at 7 p.m. And if we could all start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Sullivan, could you lead the pledge?
Will do. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And our announcement, the April 28th, 2022 special school committee meeting will be recorded and will be posted on the district's website at the conclusion of the 4 interviews for superintendent. Under the open meeting law, the public is permitted to make an audio or video recording of an open session at a public meeting. At this time, I would ask if anyone is recording tonight's meeting to please identify themselves. Seeing no one, we'll move on to our next agenda item. We have Mr. Brent Conway with us here tonight from Pentucket Regional School District. Mr. Conway, welcome. Thank you for being here. You've had a long day in our district, and thank you for coming and touring our schools, visiting with our teachers, our staff, parent community forums. It meant a lot to have you here in the district, so thank you. We each have 2 questions for you tonight that are kind of formalized questions, and if time allows, we'd like to then open that up to some follow-up questions, if that's possible, and we'd like to ask you to maybe do an opening statement or tell us something that you want us to know about yourself.
Sure.
Let's start.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you to all of you for your long week as well and your commitment to this process. So I appreciate your time and efforts. So I guess for an opening statement, I'd like to, we can go through a resume for sure. We can always do that. But in general, I think I'd like to sort of let you know why I'm interested in being superintendent here in Tewksbury. I started as a teacher in Chelmsford. I was an assistant principal, and then I became a principal in Melrose, and now, after 12 years as a principal in Melrose, assistant superintendent in Pentucket Regional School District. This is my 4th year. But I'm a community member here in Tewksbury. And when the opportunity came up and I saw that the position was open, I was not looking for a job. I have not applied for other superintendent jobs. I'm not interested in being a superintendent. I'm interested in being Tewksbury's superintendent. As a community member here and being able to learn a little bit as a parent in the district as well, and having the lens of an educator and a leader in education, I saw this as an opportunity for me professionally, but I also saw the district at a point where some of the needs that were identified both through the parent and staff survey really indicated that there was some unification by parents and staff about where the direction of the district should go and what qualities there should be in a leader. And I felt like once I saw that, I felt like those were a good match for me. A superintendency is about a fit. It's about a match. It's about a fit in time. You can go through the job description, and there is not a human on this planet who has all of those skills and capabilities in front of them. However, a good superintendent is a good fit for community at a particular time and continues to grow professionally with the community and the needs of the school district. I felt like I've been able to do that throughout my career regardless of my position, and I think I can do that here in Tewksbury. Along with that, a good superintendent surrounds themselves with good people who can help with their blind spots, help fill in the gaps that they don't have, and can help take a vision forward into an entire community and a school district. So that's what I hope to do, and I look forward to the dialogue tonight. And it was a great day today, meeting with staff and families and students in particular. The tour here at the high school was great. I very much enjoyed that, and very much appreciated the opportunity to spend time in district today.
Thank you. Okay, and our first question is from Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you. I've been welcoming the candidates and telling them about the pride that I have for the community. Obviously, it's wonderful to have a fellow resident. So as opposed to welcoming you to Tewksbury and hoping you had a good day, I'm going to welcome you to LG2. Not sure if you've ever been in this room. We normally host our meetings at LG1 or the auditorium. So I hope you find the space comforting. We're going to ask a few questions. We appreciate you applying. The questions are in front of you. Nothing here is intended to trick you. We're asking all the candidates the same same questions so we can try to arrive at a place where we can find what we feel is the best fit for Tewksbury and our students. So with that, it's an ongoing goal in Tewksbury to support our students in achieving to the best of their ability. In light of the past 2 years, due to the pandemic and the social and academic loss and regression we've seen, how would you support our students, both socially and academically, in reaching this goal and ensuring the best outcomes for all students?
It's a big question, right? There's a lot there. Fortunately, I think for Tewksbury, though, this is not something that Tewksbury faces alone. So this is not an issue that Tewksbury is coming to the community. There are a lot of resources and support structures in place around us to help districts like Tewksbury move forward. The key to this is understanding where Tewksbury is in that process and what are the strengths that are in place. How can we build from the existing strengths that are here? I noticed, and it was one of the aspects that drew my attention to the position, that leadership within curriculum and instruction was going to be a critical factor. That has been my professional career, has been focusing on that. In particular, the work in Pentucket has been focusing on early literacy skills, but also advanced learning opportunities at the middle school and high school. So that has been a lot of the work. As an assistant superintendent, I'm not solely responsible for curriculum and instruction. I have responsibilities that extend to all corners of the district, and financial, human resources, civil rights, and you name it. How would we do that as a superintendent? Well, you don't do it alone, that's for sure. I think, one of the approaches that would be important, on top of understanding what are the strengths, what's going well, is to begin with information gathering and data gathering and review of existing data. And that existing data is not necessarily just MCAS scores. It's not necessarily just the public information. It's also the internal data systems that we may have. And some of it is survey data. Some of that is information and data as well. It's important to gather that information. I learned as a parent in district, you have sort of a perception that you feel that you get from the district. And one of my focus points today is walking through the district, spending time with administrators, was to either, what aspects of that may not have the context, the full context that exists. And I learned a few things today, and I learned about some of the things that were happening that I think will be critical moving ahead. I do know, the district is preparing to move forward with a literacy adoption, curriculum adoption, which I think is a key point moving ahead. When you look at performance data from the district at various points over the last 6 years, you actually see trend lines down. So some of those trend lines were heading down prior to the pandemic as well. And yet in other spots, it's gone up. My work traditionally has been about skillful implementation of high-quality curriculum. So one of the things in the focus points to ensuring that the teachers have all the tools they need in front of them is getting them the high-quality curriculum, the tools that align to the standards and align to best practices. And then the skillful implementation is sort of on the infrastructure side. Do they have the assessment data they need to understand how to implement it? And do they have the professional development and support structure? Do they have the coaching? Do they have the instructional and curriculum support that they need around them? So those are some of the key things that I would look at. In preparation for tonight, I actually did prepare what would be sort of a draft 100-day entry plan or transition plan. And if I may. And I might reference this at different points tonight. But one of those things was sort of taking that information in and understanding where those strengths are and where the points are for us to leverage moving forward. I've had pretty good success, I think, implementing some of these systems in place at different points in my career, both as a principal, also as an assistant superintendent. Academically, I see things in Tewksbury where there are a lot of opportunities here to capitalize on what we have in place. In particular, I see here at the high school the advanced placement courses that, we sort of have open access to that. But the performance of students hasn't always been as strong as it could be. There are opportunities for us to leverage some training that's professional development that's out there. In Pentucket, we signed a 3-year agreement with Mass Insight, who provides STEM and ELA AP training that's quite extensive, but they also provide programming and coaching support for the AP teachers. And you can train teachers well above and beyond those who are just doing the AP. So we have 35 teachers from Pentucket going this summer to full week of AP training. That is way beyond what we normally have for AP teachers, but we're building a bench. And we want them to bring that level of rigor and expectations to all of their classes. And there's a lot of other aspects we could look at it. I think that the big approach, you'll hear me talk about this a lot, from a systems perspective, what are the systems we need to put in place? And that starts with sort of a vision, but then what are the aspects we need to put in place to ensure that students have the right supports at the right time? And that's a sort of that's a big thing to unravel, but that has been a lot of the work throughout my career, is focusing on those systems, and ensuring we have the right data to drive those decisions, ensuring we have a schedule and the personnel in place to do that. And I'd work with the administrative team to put those in place and communicate the why to the staff and the families about why some of these things would be in place and how they can support their kids to reach the greatest extent possible to the abilities they have.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Okay. The next question is mine. How have you or how do you plan to prioritize district needs for all faculty with relation to specialized training and workshops that are applicable to their role and help them meet the instructional needs for all students?
And some of that goes back to that transition planning and the draft there. And I think there's obviously, when you talk about systems and you talk about things from a vision perspective, you want everyone in the district to be part of that and to understand where that is going. It's really critical that everyone understands why we're going where we're going. I consider myself a student-centered leader, and would try to sort of always revert back to what is best for students. In that, from a strategic perspective, if we have 3 or 4 goals, because we can't have 9, 10, or 11, that's too much, what is the training that staff need at different levels to help us achieve those goals? And those are the action steps that we build in. So a lot of this is building out a system and a structure, but in particular a plan, a strategic plan that outlines exactly how you're going to do that. I do a lot of the professional development myself in the district where I'm at. I don't know if superintendent, I would necessarily do a lot of it myself, maybe some of it, but I would be part of it initially. But making sure that what the needs are and identifying them to help us achieve what the objectives are for the student outcomes, because that's what it's all about. If someone says, we need training in X, Y, or Z, we've got to revert back to, so how does that help us meet the student objective? We have 3 or 4 key objectives. How is that going to help us do that? So we have to have that conversation there. I would probably look to have a professional development committee. We'd want staff members to be part of that to help us put together that plan, that annual plan. I can tell you in Pentucket, we basically have drafted out and planned for professional development all of next year because we know where we're going. We know what our goals and objectives are, and we know what the next steps are for training to get people where they need to be. We don't have it all planned out. We need to leave some wiggle room. Things do come up. And when it comes to specific groups of people, I mean, there is some training that is applicable to everyone, and then there is certainly some training that is not. So we try to take great pains to figure out where is the right training for the different people. I see Tewksbury sometimes maybe a little thin on the administrative curriculum and instruction support structure. And a lot of times those are the people, whether it's coaches, curriculum leaders, those are the people that are providing some of the specialized professional development and training. But we do some other things too, with partnerships with different organizations. that allow us to send people or bring people in to meet with some of those small groups. And sometimes you partner with neighboring districts as well. So we have a partnership now with Triton and Newburyport, and we take what we have as specialized and we kind of let everyone take part. So for instance, our occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, school psychologists, we're going to have some collaborative PD rather than trying to do something and spend a lot of money for 10 people. We can spend the same amount of money and we'll reach 35 or 40. So.
Thank you. And Mr. Parsons?
Thank you. So what have you done in your current district or past experience to make your special education department work better? How have you looked at ways to contain costs? And how have you balanced the needs of students with the fiscal responsibilities of schools?
So I've always, I find it interesting we talk about special education, and I always I was a special education team chair, and a lot of the work that I've done in my life is around, in particular, supporting the needs of those who have the greatest challenges, and oftentimes those are students with special education needs. Special education is only as strong as general education. And the reason I say that is the vast majority of our students with disabilities are served and spend the most amount of their time in a general education classroom. Now, we do have some students who are in sub-separate programs who spend the vast majority of their time in solely a special education environment, but most of our students are served in a general ed environment. So it's critical that special education is not worked and looked at as a silo in the district, and that they are part of everything that we do, because our students with disabilities are involved in everything that we do. So we need to apply that lens to all of it. So some of the work that I have done in particular is I was one of the administrators who worked on the Massachusetts dyslexia guidelines, and I helped craft those, and I have some sort of key parts in there that were highlighted. And I've helped do some of the trainings for administrators around the state around what those dyslexia guidelines mean. The dyslexia guidelines, well, we think of dyslexia as a disability and certainly under special education. The guidelines are actually general education guidelines, and they are not intended for special education to do exclusively. It's really intended for general education to understand how to do them. And I actually think the state has done a pretty good job because they did the work on that at the same time they did their mass literacy guidelines. And there's a lot of correlation. And I fortunately got to work on both of those projects. So overall, I mean, from a big picture perspective, as a superintendent, you're not part of an individual student team, and you're not part of that team process. And the team process drives what services the students get. And that is that process. We need to honor that process. But internally, we need to strengthen our own capacity. We need to ensure the people that we have facilitating that process have the skills and the abilities to do that. My experience is we have some pretty good people doing that work. But we also have to make sure they don't have roadblocks in making sure they get kids what they need when they need it. That's really critical. Containing cost when it comes to special education, as a superintendent, there's not a lot a superintendent would do directly in individual situations to contain costs. But I think from a planning perspective and having ongoing dialogue with the Director of Student Services and the leadership team around what are the needs, can we plan proactively so that we can front load supports so that costs don't mount as we move forward. The reason why things oftentimes get expensive is because we didn't do a good enough job early on trying to help and prevent the problems from sort of snowballing. So where there are situations where we can do that, we should be trying to do that. Sometimes those costs are hard to quantify at the end, right? Because you put some cost up front in the hopes that it pays off, but really our hopes is that it actually pays off in the way that the student is in a better spot moving forward. The financial part is just sort of part of it. But a lot of it is just forward planning and thinking about things, and sometimes, as a superintendent, things happen that are well out of your control. You know, you have a student move into district who has an expensive placement, and that's just what it is. And that student is very much entitled to that education that they're receiving. And we want to make sure that we're not, you know, saying that can't happen, because that's not the case. So,
Thank you.
And Ms. Biagioni-Smith?
Mine. All right, so you're proposing a highly controversial program. The school committee or your staff is seemingly divided on the issue, and a group is formed to oppose the program. You strongly believe that this new program will be highly beneficial to students. What steps would you take in this scenario?
well, this is a spot where we need to rely on our communications and relationship skills. And it probably wouldn't just be me doing the work. We'd probably have to think more strategically about where are sort of the leverage points to have people understand what's going on. And when I say people understand, it's not about me making sure that anyone who is opposed understands my point. It's also ensuring that I understand what is their point of contention as well. So communication is a two-way street. And we have to make sure we have partnerships in this. And, you know, I'm certainly doing a lot of talking tonight, but ideally, I could do more listening. And you certainly gain more from listening than you do from talking. So I think that's important to understand people's perspectives and to do some of that listening. And you can model that up front in the hopes that, on the flip side, they'll be able to listen to you and your perspectives. If I feel something will be very highly beneficial for students, I should be able to bring research. I should be able to bring data. I should be able to bring evidence from other districts or other programs. Those are the types of things I should be able to supply. Yet we know, even in spite of all of that, sometimes people just have an opposition to something, especially if it's a change. I think a little bit, I use this quote a lot from Brene Brown. People don't fear change, they fear irrelevance. And if someone has known something their whole life and they've always done it a particular way, and now we're asking them to change, what really the fear is that everything they've ever known will now be irrelevant. And that is a frightening proposition to a lot of people, especially adults. Kids are actually a lot better with it than adults. So to think that way about it, and that it's, you know, the humanity of it and the human side of difficult situations and controversial topics, and to do more listening, we'll probably get further along in trying to understand. And then, you know, making a decision, is this something we really need to move forward with despite controversy, despite opposition, or is it something we can maybe regroup and think about, maybe there's a different approach that we can take to achieve the same outcome, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about what is best for students. And can we find a different way to get what's best for students that maybe won't find such opposition? So,
Thank you very much.
Okay, and Mr. Russo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Brent. So over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of polarizing views on a lot of different topics, from, you know, mass to CRT to DEI to all the things in between, and specifically about parents having a say. You know, parents had a lens into the child's classroom for the, you know, for the period of remote and hybrid learning, and now that that's gone, parents still want that view and that say. What are your feelings toward this, and how will you work to ensure that parents are having their voices heard?
yeah. Well, we talked a little bit about this in the community forum, and I talked about it earlier today, too, with some of the principals, and that our role as a school district isn't to tell parents what to do. And parents' role isn't to tell us what to do. Our role collaboratively is to have a partnership. And some of this, I think, ties into the prior question as well, is for us to work together so that we understand where each other is coming from their perspectives, and building perspectives. And that's about building empathy and understanding where people are coming from. to say it's been polarizing might be an understatement. We certainly have seen that, and I don't, and this is not exclusive to Tewksbury. This has been the case in districts all around. I think we get heightened, we get emotional on both sides of a topic, especially if we feel as though it's personal, and especially if it involves our kids, right? What we have to remember is if parents are upset about something that involves your kids, it's because they want what's best for their kid. It's not because they are mad at the adult. And we may disagree on things. That may be the truth. That may still continue to happen. But we want to have that partnership and that opportunity to have that dialogue so that we understand each other's perspectives. When we start talking about curriculum choices and so forth, in Massachusetts, we're actually, the vast majority of what we do for curriculum is very much driven by curriculum standards and the Department of Education and their guidelines on how to implement those. And what is considered best practice and what's considered research-based and evidence-based methods. Outside of a few classes maybe at the high school where you begin to have a little more leeway in some of the electives, there's not as much sort of flexibility as parents might believe there is sometimes. And yet, it still goes back to having the dialogue and understanding why this is being delivered the way it is. Sometimes things get labeled as a certain term or whatever it may be, and those labels really just aren't necessarily accurate or they're not understood. So trying to make sure that we understand what the concern, where is that root of the concern, and not get hung up in a position, not get positional about things, or not get hung up in a label as well, and get to the root of what is the concern, what are we really worried about. So,
Thank you.
And Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you. How would you successfully collaborate with stakeholders in the school community to assure a successful opening of the new school and the combining of grades 2 through 4? What considerations would you apply to the process to minimize educational impact for our students?
So I have a magic wand, and we're going to be able to just wave it, and poof, everything's going to be fine in January when the school opens, right? Yeah, mid-year transition is interesting for sure. From what I can tell, there's been some thought and consideration already around some of those aspects. And however, to some extent, I'm not joking about the poof, because magically, school will open, the doors will open, the kids will go in, the teachers will have their classrooms, and the vast majority of things will be perfectly fine because the teachers will make it that way, because that's who they are. But administratively, there's a lot of things we can do. And even if I was selected as your superintendent, I would want to begin to sort of help have that dialogue now, because I think there's a lot of angst. Now, I'm in a district where we also have a building project. We are building a new 7 to 12 middle high school that is slated to open in August. And we took a lot of work in preparing how we would transition over the summer. We have to tear down 2 buildings in 10 weeks, and school ends on the 14th, and all the teachers have 2 boxes, and they have to be out on the 15th, because on the 16th, they would be in there with the bulldozer. That's basically what would happen. So they have 24 hours to essentially get out of the building, because we need the 10 weeks to knock the buildings down and get it prepared. And yet at the same time, we have done a lot of preparation work, and we're combining buildings, middle school and high school, coming into one building, combining administration. So a lot of the same stuff that Tewksbury is about to prepare for. So, it's interesting. We talked about some schedules. I helped present because there were some struggles back and forth, so I helped present about it. And some people were still like, I have so much stress about going into the new building. And I thought to myself, like, you're going into this gorgeous brand new building. You're going to have all of these technology, all of this stuff. What is so anxiety provoking about this? So I went to that teacher the next day. I said, do you have, I emailed you, do you have a minute? Can I swing by? So I swung by and I just said, tell me what it is. Am I going to have a parking spot? Like, not that was the only thing, right? Well, yeah, you're going to have a parking spot. Do you know where it is? No, I don't know where the whole parking lot's going to be yet. No, we don't. Okay. And then we went on to the other things about what are the things that were bothering that teacher. And a lot of them were, well, we're going to have shared collaborative space as teachers. I'm not going to be able to have my own space. That's really bothering me. I said, well, what if I could tell you how much time you'll have there? And you go, yeah, that would be great. Okay, give me about a week. And you begin to realize they just have these small little things. They're so used to the way things are, and they begin to conceptualize, and they can't. It's the unknown. So those are the types of things that teachers, I guarantee right now, teachers and administrators are nervous about and anxious about. It's the unknowns. And if we can help the adults in this situation lessen the unknowns and be more familiar with what to expect, the kids are going to be fine. The kids are going to walk into that building. They are going to do just fine. But there is some administrative work in the middle of the year that we'll have to figure out a little bit, and we'll have to talk to some of those people. I don't know who that principal of the building will be. I don't know that you know yet either at this point, and how all those pieces will work together. But as soon as that's figured out, we need to move forward with some of those things. We need to, whether it's video tours in the weeks prior, as even now, you could potentially, if you can walk through with a video and show and you show that to the families, and you use video to give them a visual. Visuals are really powerful tools. And you give them an image of what it's like. So even though the driveway isn't done yet, what will it be like to get off the bus and walk into the building? Walk through with a video camera. Show them. This is how kids think now, too. They want to learn something. What do? They YouTube it. Why don't we YouTube all of the questions, essentially? Show them the video experience of what it might be, even though it's not finished construction at this point. And then you can continue to do those little types of things. You can do little pieces at a time, and they get a little chunk. Oh, that's really good. Well, what about this? Yeah, that's coming in 3 weeks. We're going to do that one. And you do another one. You do another one. And do it all summer long. You do it all fall. So those are little things you can help prepare. There's a whole nother side to this of bringing 2 buildings together, 3 buildings, and having different cultures, right? Different people working together. What are the traditions and histories that you want to come over? What are the new ones you want to start? And you want to bring some over, but you want to begin to start your own, right? And you want that school to be its own school, not a carryover of 3 or 4 others. And that speaks to leadership, right? And helping them really understand how to do that. That'll be a hands-on process. I envision myself probably moving boxes, so it's not necessarily what I mean by hands-on, but on top of that, hands-on and being present and helping people work through some of that. But give the people a say, give the teachers a say, give some of the kids and families a say of what that will be like. It's exciting, and I know from our perspective as adults, you begin to plan things. This is really exciting. It's also anxiety-provoking for a lot of people. So,
Thank you.
welcome.
Okay. And my next question. We have received lots of feedback on the wishes of many stakeholders to evaluate and improve on communication acts across the district. Can you speak to how you have or how you intend to be a leader that seeks input, processes that information, and communicates it back to the community?
Yeah. So I think by nature, living in the community, I have a sense of where the places are where you'd want to be. I have a phrase, I spoke about it earlier, about sort of walking the rope line and looking for those opportunities where you're out in the community and just informally being around to hear and listen. And some people, hey, nice to see you, it's all casual. And every once in a while you get someone who says, I was meaning to email you. They could have emailed they did. But now that they saw you, they wanted to ask you that question. And it's being that visible and that present to be able to do that. I had a question about so-and-so. And usually the questions are simple. Oh, yeah, this is who you call, this is how you do it. And that's all people want to hear. They want to know that you're there and you're there to help them with things when it happens. So that's just a component from a leadership perspective, being visible and present in a community. Going to the right events too. We had a question in the community forum about how would you engage parents in the district? And some of it is the district has to engage out to parents. We can't always just expect them to come to us. We have to go out to them sometimes too. So that's part of it, and thinking differently about that. So I would also, one of the components of the transition plan is really talking about a communication plan. And a communication plan outlines what it is that we communicate about and in what ways and with what frequency. So you build out expectations. So I'll give you an example. A change that I've seen recently in Tewksbury is everyone is using S'mores. All the schools use a S'more newsletter. It's a great tool. It's easily translatable for all of our families. It's digital, rolls over. You get a lot of features to it. We use it in Pentucket as well. But you have to know how people's not everyone communicates the same way. So the difference is, on the S'more comes out, it's a link. One of the suggestions I would make, and I think it's, so we see it in some of I think the Youth Football Association, maybe you even do this communication, I don't know. So the email comes out, and it lists, here are the 6 things that are in this newsletter. Here's the link to the newsletter. That little change, so if I'm a parent, oh, another newsletter, oh, what's in the oh, I do want to know about that. Click, and in you go. So that little change in how you communicate all of a sudden becomes a little bit more focused and directed, right? So these little pieces that you begin to think about. Now, what's information that we would communicate in a newsletter versus what's information we would communicate in a direct email? What's information that we would communicate in a phone call home, you know? And so you have a whole plan, and you're able to articulate what form of communication, what frequency, and how would you do it, and you make that plan public so parents know to expect it. I think the schools do a wonderful job here. They get weekly newsletters, and everyone knows when to expect it. I know when the Ryan newsletter is coming. It comes, I think it's Friday afternoons. It comes without fail, right? And that's just when it comes. It's automatic. So in thinking about what are those routines, and in that way, if something is communicated that's not routine, it draws your attention as well. So.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Parsons?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you need to take a minute, grab a sip of water?
Go right ahead.
Okay, cool. So these past few years have definitely taken a toll on our school community and other communities as well. Several relationships between stakeholder groups in town are strained. The argument can be made that these less than ideal relationships have created challenges for our families, students, educators, school staff, and residents. There exists a sentiment that this tension between stakeholders makes more challenges than necessary in doing the work of best serving our students and residents. How will you restore relationships between stakeholder groups around the common goal of providing the best education for students possible?
Do I still get to use that magic wand? No? This is the challenge of leadership. And I think in my cover letter I wrote to you, a definition of leadership would be there's a gap between people's espoused beliefs and their actions. And leadership is where you fill that gap. So people can talk about wanting what's best for students, but if this is what they're doing over here, that's not matching up. So the leadership is in the middle. The superintendent is not doing this alone, but can certainly be part of that servant leadership, and how can I help the community to do some of that work. I think that is a critical aspect that the district is going to need. It's part of what drew me to the job, to be honest. I felt like that was something I can do. Bringing the lens of a community member as well to say, I have skin in this game. I am invested in this outcome, both personally and professionally. And I think that's a critical factor, right? It's not something that happens and there's a magic moment, for instance, and everyone feels better about it. It's going to take a little bit of time and trust. It's going to take communication, but it's going to take some systems and structures too. So having a labor management structure where we can duly develop the agenda and the items that we address, for instance. That would be a productive step, for instance. Potentially, maybe even having a labor management group where the superintendent and and the president of the teachers union are not actually chairing the labor management, and that it's a teacher and an administrator, but the others are present. So that's like a structure and a system that you can put into place, assuming best intentions and helping people to understand that. Some of this is some of that training and discussion we need to have across the board. Some of it's leadership training as well, because if I have beliefs and I have ways that we expect that we should interact with others, it's just as important the rest of the leadership team understands exactly what that is and how they can interact and put that forward as well. And that's not just relationships between administration and teachers union. That is relationships between administration and parents. It's relationships between parents and teachers. It's relationships between the school committee and the public. It's all of it together. The superintendency and the school committee is a very unique relationship in the way of boss and employee. It really is. But I look forward to that opportunity to work with you as well about how we do that together in the community. At the end of the day, it is about what is best for students, and we want to assume best intentions that people want what's best for students. But when there's a gap there, that's where the leadership needs to have, and sometimes it's honest and hard conversations that are uncomfortable at times. But if we do it in a way that's human and understanding the humanity behind it, we can usually get people to a point where we can move forward. So,
Thank you.
welcome.
Okay, and Ms. Biagioni-Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You did speak a little bit about this in the community forum, so it might be a little bit repetitive, but I think it's important. What role do you believe the staff should play in decision-making? How have you involved your staff in the decision-making process?
Sure. Well, if any of the staff want to do the no school snow call, we can hand that off right away. That's all I remember my superintendent growing up. That's what he was responsible was for making that call. That was it. Involving staff in decision, I think they should be involved. It doesn't mean they make all the decisions. It just means that they're involved in that process. They have insights that are really critical and important that we have to take into consideration. There are you can committee things to death, and you can have too many people on a committee, and you don't get anything done. So I think there's a level of balance of how you get stakeholder sort of feedback and involvement so you can gain their input versus, well, we are management and we do need to make some decisions. We need to move forward with some things. In my experience, most teachers understand that. They understand that decisions need to be made, and they understand that they won't always agree with all the decisions. They want to be sure that they understand their point is taken into consideration. And it's just as critical that in any decisions that are made, the why we're making the decisions are articulated to them, right? It's just as important. And I think that may be even more important so that they know why things are happening so that they understand how they can move forward. I have worked with different people who, Brent, just tell me what you need me to do and I'll go do it, right? And they want no part in the decision-making process, none. Just tell me what you need me to do. And actually, I don't want to tell you what to go do because the next time I'm not going to be there to tell you have to do it, right? So I can tell you what, but I want to tell you why I'm telling you what to do then, if that's how it is. But otherwise, we want some feedback on some things. And especially if we make a decision about something or we say this is the direction we'd want to go, and some people have some pushback, you got to listen to that because maybe there's a tweak that we have to make because maybe we missed something. There's always perspectives that we're not considering. So we have to think about how do we set up some systems and structures like labor management, for instance, to have some of that in place. PD committees. We run a curriculum renewal cycle, and so I facilitate that. This year we're doing science. Last year we did social studies. The year before we did the ELA. And so in those cycles, that's a collaborative team of people from all levels that take part, administrators and myself. I co-chair, but I co-chair with a teacher. And this year I sort of stepped back. I let two other people co-chair, but I'm helping to facilitate. So, those are the types of things we do to get some buy-in so that when it comes forward, it was the curriculum renewal cycles team who made these decisions. not Brent in an office, so.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And our final question, formal question anyway, Mr. Russo.
Thank you. Well, you're a resident in town, so you know some of the property tax, things that happen and whatnot, not just in Tewksbury, but, everywhere across the Commonwealth. Specifically the Tewksbury, though, with property tax going up 2.5% every year, and certainly over 60% of those funds being used towards our school districts. How will you ensure that the budget you are putting forward takes into account the level of services that Tewksbury residents in many cases have come to expect, as well as ensuring that that budget is really focusing on student achievement?
Yeah. So, I think fortunately, the town itself has sort of put itself in a good situation financially, and we have a town manager who's done a pretty good job, I think, of figuring out how to do that. That's not where the Tewksbury schools were about 15 years ago, just about when I first moved here. In fact, it was every year we was trying to figure out how to cut $1 million without cutting teachers or something, and it was a challenging situation for sure. And those budgetary decisions, you go to make those, of course those are impacting kids. Right. And can you do that in 1 year without a longitudinal impact? Sure. You do that 2, 3, 4 years in a row, and you are having a longitudinal impact that will have an impact for years and years and years to come. But developing a budget is not, again, not done in a silo. Nothing's done in a silo. So working with our own finance director here and the town side to begin that process. But we really start with, this is why having these strategic plans sort of outlined and your strategic goals outlined, that you start with your goals. What is it that you want to achieve, and how can the budget help you achieve that? And it's the same thing we go back to. What is it that we want to achieve? How does the professional development help us achieve that? And it's everything's sort of driven by those goals. It's also why you can't have 9, 10, 11 goals, because you can't possibly achieve all those things. You can't put enough resources to achieve all of those things. So I think helping people to understand that, and that is working with you as a school committee. It's also working with the leadership team around what is it that we're working to achieve. How does the budget is essentially a statement on our values. What is it that we value in the schools, and how does that reflect that? So that's sort of a 10,000-foot view of how to do it. I mean, we can get pretty technical, I think, in how we do some of those things, but in general, I think that's how it is. And, I think fortunately the schools are, I wouldn't say flush with cash, but funded in a way that does allow us to address some things. And it could be, potentially as I'm here, begin to realize maybe there are some pockets where things need to shift and change where we can get better outcomes for what we want. You bring a new set of lenses to it, and you start to realize just because we always did it this way doesn't mean we need to continue to do it that way.
Thank you.
So at this time, we do have some time available, so we could open it up and start with maybe, is there one question per person? Is that anybody would like to ask follow-up questions?
Sure, I'll go first.
Sure.
I think this is a unique opportunity for us where you're a parent and an applicant, so I'll make it as painless as I can. What is one thing that you see as a parent that the district does really well, and what, if you're the superintendent, can you do to make that even better, take it to the next level?
My kids enjoy being in school, and they very much have enjoyed their teachers and their interactions and their connections with their teachers. And it's interesting because I asked a similar question to some of the faculty, and they shared some of the same thing. They felt like the connections were the piece that they did really well. And I think that, there's no PD I can bring in or two that makes that happen. That is the individuals that have been hired, and it's a culture and a climate that exists within a district. It's also a community value, right? And I think to some extent that's what drew us here as very young parents when I did not have white hair. was that, we saw that and we saw the potential of where that would happen. How can we strengthen that? I think, again, we go back to, where are our strengths? How can we leverage those strengths to achieve more of what we want? And some of that is in listening to the teachers about, they feel torn a lot about that they've had to develop curriculum, that they feel like they're struggling to do all of that on top of maintain those connections and do that teaching. So I think those are some things we can leverage in that you focus on the students. We're going to get you the support you need to do all of this, and you can do the important work, the student-facing forward work. So,
Great, thank you.
welcome.
Madam Chair, I'll ask a follow-up if you don't mind.
Yeah, Mr. Russo?
So thank you. So I actually want to go back to something, I think it was Mr. Parsons' question on special education. Sure. I think one of the things that you had said was that, there's not a whole lot that a superintendent can do to contain costs. And sometimes, it's because problems, try to prevent before they snowball, et cetera. And I'm
Sure.
sort of paraphrasing there a little bit, I believe.
Yep.
I guess a question that I would have as a follow-up is, when I think of sort of containing costs, I would look at, are there ways that we could think of, a lot of the cost comes from sort of out of district placement, et cetera.
Yep.
Are there ways that we could look at maybe in-house programs and
Yep.
sort of maybe can you talk to maybe some experiences you have there?
And that was sort of what I was getting at with the snowball,
Yeah.
and that can we see and predict where some programmatic needs may be, and can we make some shifts and adjustments in our programming? And I think there is certainly data available that allows us to do that and to do it effectively. Things in the special ed world can change like that, right? And I had some good conversations today with Mr. Libby a little bit about, planning financially for unanticipated costs. And I think maybe that's where I was going with it. So I don't want you to think I wasn't thinking the superintendent can't do anything about it. I was thinking more in terms of sometimes something happens and there's no influence. It just is a cost and it sits there, and that's what it is, and that's what's needed. But it is more about the programmatic needs. The stronger we build up general education and the stronger we can support that, the less of a need there is for some of those programs that arise. So some of that is trying to find the least restrictive environment and ensure that those environments are not undermining the quality instruction. So this is the key, and I used this example a little earlier, but it applies to academics as well. I can talk about it from literacy and math. Our general education can't undermine our special education. They need to work together. And that's maybe the most critical thing that happens. And when cases blow up, right, and things really fall apart, oftentimes it's because the student is not part of the general education environment successfly. So what are the things we can do there? And the example I'd give, if we had a student who had an anxiety disorder, and that student it was a struggle for them to come to school every day, but were providing a service to that student every day with a counselor or a school psychologist where they were addressing that anxiety, and it was working. 30 minutes a day, and that student leaves that psychologist's office, and they feel ready to tackle the rest of the school day. And they go back to a classroom, and the teacher, well-intended, realizes the student just missed 30 minutes of class and says, "Oh, I'm so glad you're back. We've got so much to catch you up on. We've got to do this. I'll get you, don't worry, I'm going to get you caught." Everything we just did for that intensive intervention that was successful was undermined by a well-intentioned individual, right? Because what we're not doing is making sure that our general education is established and set up in a way that it's supportive of the needs. That speaks to universally designed for learning. Universal design, it's a framework and a structure. And it applies not just to something like with someone with anxiety, it applies to literacy, it applies to math, it applies to all academic settings. And helping to build that out so you can see there's a situation right there that if that situation continued to spiral, that student's not going to be able to be in general education anytime soon. They're going to need a sub-separate program. And all because of a well-intentioned person who wasn't meaning to do that. So how do you help a teacher with that? Well, you need some support staff who can help coach them. And I don't know that we have all of that personnel in place to be able to do some of those things. at least with the, on the response, be able to do it quickly and readily. So,
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Mrs. Biagioni Smith.
Thank you. So you spoke about leadership and how you would approach that. As an assistant superintendent, you're part of a leadership team with your superintendent. Can you speak a little bit about leadership versus management and how you kind of flip those and approach that type of situation if you were to come into the district?
yeah, I mean, some of the job is management. There's no doubt about that. Things do need to be managed. Decisions need to be made. Papers need to be signed, and so forth. And there's certainly no shortage of management in the role of superintendent. An effective superintendent, though, is one who leads, but also uses distributive leadership and helps their leadership team do some of the same work, so that, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to be the one helping that teacher understand how to ensure that their practices in class are okay for that student, right? I'm just not going to be that person. I can't be there. I even found, even as an assistant superintendent, I was doing some of the coaching until we brought in some of the support. I felt bad for I'd be there helping a teacher figure it out. I couldn't see them for another 3-4 weeks because I had other places I needed to be. And that's not what they need. They need someone there every day for a little while. So, so distributive leadership, I think, would be an approach. And sort of that is, what's your infrastructure for meeting and supporting your leadership team? So when we have changed and evolved in Pentucket, we have a principal leadership team, so it's the superintendent, myself, and just the principals. We meet on Fridays, Friday mornings. That tends to be a management operations-oriented meeting. It's nuts and bolts. And we separate out the teaching and learning and instructional leadership team, which meets once a month after school, and we have the assistant principals, the instructional coaches. It's a much broader meeting. And the differences between those two meetings are stark. We do a lot of calibration work around teacher evaluation. We talk about curriculum and instruction. We do a lot of that work in those meetings versus the nuts and bolts. We're talking about safety planning. We're talking, all of those elements. So it's all necessary. Trying to do them in the same meeting on the same agenda is a disaster waiting to happen. And honestly, there's different people at the table, and we don't want to waste people's time. We want the right people at the right table at the right time. So what are those systems and structures you'd sort of put up to have those leadership conversations? Some of it is mentoring as well, making sure that our folks have mentors, especially any of our new leaders and new leadership roles. So I do some of the mentoring now for our assistant principals and principals who are new, and that's a very different role, mentoring them, than it is as their superintendent. I try to do a lot of listening as a mentor and just try not to tell them how to fix a problem, because at the end of the day, they have to know how to fix that problem. So make them do the thinking and work through it. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Great. And Mr. Parsons.
Hey, I do have a question. So it's clear from reading through your resume and your statement and just what we've heard from various stakeholders you've worked with, curriculum and instruction, and specifically literacy, is your passion. It seems. Am I getting that correct?
I think it's one of them, sure, yeah.
Okay. When you have change, there is going to be a sense of loss. You're not going to be able to do everything you might have done that you might have had that kind of passion for and energy, like you've demonstrated and have clearly brought into your work with literacy. In the new role as a superintendent, how are you going to manage your new responsibilities and, I guess to put it straightforward, let go of some of that work
Yeah.
and, or even more, trust someone else to do it?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a really fair question. And, I've had different, moving from the elementary school where I was very much focused on that, and then became a principal at the middle school where I wasn't focused on that. We actually focused a lot more on math, and we focused on a lot of the social emotional and general inclusive practices approach. So I've been able to shift, and then moving to Pentucket, having to shift back and focus on some of that. But no, I think you're right, and it's maybe one of the reasons I wasn't looking for other superintendent jobs, because I very much like the work that I do. But I also know that that is work that the district needs to do as well. And I'm okay giving that up to other people. We created a new position this year of a literacy coach and coordinator, and she has been amazing. And I am more than willing to hand over the vast majority of everything to her to do. She's quite skilled. I was fortunate enough to hire her and bring her on board. And I have very much enjoyed watching her flourish and take on. It's allowed me to be able to do some other things that I know needed to get done as well. And it didn't take me long to trust her and know that she can do the work. And we have a good relationship, and we have 3 coaches, and we meet regularly outside of that teaching and learning structure where we just talk about the bigger picture so that we're always on the same page and some of the same planning. So it's about communication. So while you have people to go out and do the work that you need them to do, you have to have a way of communicating with them to make sure that they understand and we're on the same page moving forward. I still see myself being involved in a lot of that as a leader. And it's I don't know what it is that I'd give up on the other end of it, but I think that's the work that needs to be done, and I'm prepared to do that. So, but I think in my career I've been able to sort of shift focus based on what presents in front of us. So,
Thank you.
And I don't have any questions at this time, so anybody else have something last minute?
I maybe just have one more question, and it just sort of goes along the lines of sort of what Mr. Sullivan was saying, and sort of as a unique, portion here where you are a parent in the district, and at any point, being a resident here, has there ever been anything from your experience that you've seen the district do where you were like, I'm going to take that and go use it in my school, my district, my whatever the role might have been that you had at the time? Is there anything that comes to mind, maybe?
Yeah, I think there have been some things. I'm thinking in terms of some of the things, at the Ryan, for instance, that I've seen that they've done from a collaborative process and the way their inclusive setting works. I've been really super impressed with the skill set of the teachers there, and they're truly their student-centered focus, and they've had some terminology and phrases and things that they've used, and so that's pretty good. I like that. So yeah,
Excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Great. So at this time, if you have some closing remarks you'd like to share?
I'll be brief. You have had 3 extremely long days, so thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you tonight, and all day as well to talk to the other folks. I very much appreciate it. I hope you will find me to be a student-centered leader, and I think I'm a collaborative person. I like to work with others. I like to communicate and build some consensus to move forward. But at the end of the day, I try to do what's right by kids. And that's sort of where I draw the line. Most of the time, I'm going to do what's right by kids. And certainly as a resident here, I think I have good reason for that. But as a professional educator, that's how I've made my career, doing that. So I hope to be your superintendent, and I very much appreciate the time. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So, future school committee dates: May 3rd, 2022, special school committee meeting, superintendent interview; May 5th, 2022, special school committee meeting for deliberations and vote. And do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 And anyone opposed. Motion passes, and we are adjourned. Thank you.